everybody for joining us after lunch. A few more people shuffling in, find a seat. We've got a packed 30 minutes ahead to talk about cross-chain interoperability, which in Cosmos mainly means IBC and the future of IBC. So let me bring up our panelists. First, we've got Jack from Strangelove. Come around. We've got Adrian from Anoma Namada. Omar, also known as Brainjar from Composable. And Usman from Avalanche. So let's do just a real quick round of intros to backstop who you are and where your focus is right now.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Jack Zampolin. I'm the CEO of Strangelove, and I do Cosmos stuff.
I'm Adrian. I normally have red hair. Didn't have time this time. I'm the co-founder of Namada and Anoma.
Hi, I'm Brainjar. I'm the CEO and founder of Composable.
Hey everyone, my name is Usman. I'm one of the developer relations engineers at Avalanche.
All right, great. Now, we're here to talk about the future of IBC. There's a new IBC roadmap coming out, which, Jack, I understand you also worked on a bit. Maybe you can just start by explaining a bit about where IBC needs to go in the coming months. And I'm assuming that this audience is familiar with the basics of IBC, so we'll sort of skip over that part and look at the future.
Yeah. You know, I think that the key things that we need are adoption. And there's sort of like vertical as well as horizontal. So horizontally, we need to span out to more and more ecosystems and really deliver on this promise of true cross-chain interoperability between any different blockchain ecosystems. And there's a lot of work to do, and Brainjar and his team have been doing amazing work on this. They've been pioneers in this area. And I honestly don't think we would see any movement towards IBC outside of Cosmos without Brainjar and his team and the work that they've done. So just want to give him a little bit of time for that. And then sort of like vertically within Cosmos, I think that increasing the ease of use of the IBC protocol and enabling more advanced use cases through better developer tooling and some protocols like middlewares and better interchain accounts. And that's kind of where I see IBC going over the next year.
I think from my perspective, there are probably two important points. One is everyone outside of this room and sort of in the wider ecosystem needs to understand that IBC is not specific to Cosmos or Tendermint even, or the Cosmos SDK or a specific language. IBC really is just a protocol specification for how chains with fast finality can communicate with each other. There's no reason why Cosmos and Nia shouldn't be connected, or Cosmos and Polkadot. So really we need more implementations for more consensus clients within IBC. And I think the second thing is we want to have a more stable Rust implementation and ideally even a third language implementation of the IBC protocol to really showcase that, look, IBC is not specific to Cosmos SDK, IBC is not specific to Tendermint, IBC is there to be a neutral protocol to allow any blockchain to talk to any other blockchain.
Yeah, I think what we saw, like, a lot of the work that we did was putting things like IBCRS into production, building a new relayer to connect Cosmos and the Polkadot ecosystem. I think now basically there are no more excuses of like centralized solutions saying, oh yeah, it's really expensive to do IBC between these two different ecosystems. That's just false now. So they need to come up with better excuses. And I think in our perspective, we're just continuing on the path to other ecosystems as quickly as possible. Ethereum and many other ecosystems in the pipeline. So at this point, I think IBC should become the de facto, not only sort of syntax and standard, but also trust model for communicating between two chains.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that bring a little bit of a different perspective here. So if you guys aren't familiar, Avalanche is a company from behind the Avalanche blockchain. And we kind of follow a similar thesis to Cosmos in the sense that we want our developers to build their own blockchain. And we also understand this thesis that all these blockchains, having your own blockchain is really valuable, but if they can't be connected and they can't talk to each other, it means nothing, right? And so we look at ecosystems like Cosmos, and we look at protocols like IBC, and we're huge fans of the way that they've shown product market fit within their ecosystem with allowing cross-chain interoperability within Cosmos. And we, like to build off Jack's point, we're really looking to expand that kind of interoperability within our own ecosystem. And so there's a lot of teams that are looking to implement IBC within the Avalanche ecosystem to kind of bridge over assets from different chains in the Cosmos ecosystem into Avalanche fairly natively. And so huge fans of IBC. We have our own native messaging protocol that we're hoping to be compatible with IBC as well. So a lot of things happening on both sides that we're really interested in.
I think to pick up on Brainjar's and yours point a little bit here, the other thing that's really important that sort of the world needs to understand in the next 6 months is that in the spectrum of interoperability, this is a spectrum. Like you can't really do better than IBC, even if you write a different protocol. IBC is limited not by what the protocol does, but rather what is capable, so from theoretical computer science standpoint in terms of distributed systems. There's really, you can't write a new protocol, whether this be XCM from Polkadot or something like this, and go, my trust model is now fundamentally better than IBC. IBC is sort of the most optimal trust model you can have if you want to be fully decentralized. You can make IBC faster if you like centralize more a little bit. But I think this is important to understand that like there's really no point in like inventing all these new protocols all the time. IBC is just an open specification that people should really use.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there is one point that I want to make sure that people understand as we're moving into this era of bringing IBC beyond Cosmos. Right now, the trust model is directly between different Tendermint chains, and it's an honest majority assumption. A lot of the chains that are coming to market, like Composable and Landslide over to Avalanche, and there's a number of projects like Composable as well as Union and Polymer working on IBC over to Ethereum. A lot of those projects, because of the specifics of the different consensuses on those other networks, will have to build a lot of modifications into Tendermint, and it's hard to get those broadly disseminated. So the early stage of IBC moving to other ecosystems will be mediated through these committees, but it is using the best cryptography available in those ecosystems. So for example, in Avalanche, what we've worked on, they have built out a wonderful protocol called the warp messaging protocol to enable communication between different Avalanche subnets. The Avalanche integration we're working on uses that warp messaging protocol for validation of the messages moving externally. This is a slightly different trust model than the Tendermint one, and also there's going to need to be a committee at first because of a lot of the custom code. But as these teams fully open source this stuff, some of it comes out of business source licenses, which is kind of a necessary evil of doing a lot of this work. That's when we'll see the real point-to-point IBC that folks want to see, but there is going to be kind of a transitionary stage here.
So yeah, this gets into sort of understanding the differences between what IBC is and what most bridges that are currently in use today is in terms of the trust model. The mantra is trust the chains, not the bridges. But when it comes to deploying IBC, for example, to Ethereum, I understand one of the biggest impediments is that can be expensive. So how is that going to change, or have there been technical solutions that have come about in the past year to make that easier?
Yeah, I think the general approach is, like what we've seen is there's like been a huge jump in ZK technology over the past two to 3 years, and it's really enabled just really cool things that you can do to reduce costs. For instance, like snarking signatures and allowing, actually in the end state, the hope is that IBC to Ethereum is actually cheaper and faster than things like Axelar or Wormhole or whatever is being used in the centralized context. I think when that actually happens, then it's sort of no longer users choosing IBC because it's more sort of trust minimized, but actually because it's cheaper and faster and more usable for like the average person.
Just to add on to that, I think a key piece of that is the IBC feature set. Because it is a shared protocol that works across a number of different chains, there's developers building new applications and new ways to use this general message passing protocol all the time. And as that body of knowledge increases, it puts us in a much better position competitively with a lot of these other protocols.
And sort of on a purely practical level, doing point-to-point IBC should always be faster than going via some central middleman. So there's not only a point of like trust minimization, right? Like if you go via wormhole, now your trust model is you better hope wormhole does fine because they are clearly in your trust path. So anyone that you hop via is always in your trust path, but this also adds extra latency. So like in the end state, once we have efficient ZK-led clients, for example, for Tendermint consensus that can be verified in Ethereum, it should absolutely be faster to go directly point-to-point from any chain to Ethereum.
Yeah. I think that there's like two different methods here. There's the Tendermint client over on the Ethereum side, and there's teams using ZK to solve that, and then there's also teams using BLS to solve that, and then there's the Ethereum to Cosmos side using the Altair Lite client right now, but that's going to evolve over time, especially as single slot finality moves a little bit closer in the E2 roadmap.
And I think what's going to be really interesting as well is that what you mentioned earlier is that currently all IBC compatible chains are run using Tendermint consensus, right?
Yeah.
We haven't
well,
really.
Brainjar made that not the case.
Polkadot. Yeah, Polkadot uses Grandpa. So Grandpa is like the first additional consensus mechanism that can communicate over IBC.
Very cool. So those are the kinds of things that I would be really excited to see within IBC, is to see it being battle tested using different consensus mechanisms and making that more easier to access IBC on different chains, right? So Avalanche, we have our own unique consensus mechanism. Throwing IBC on top of that, maybe making it more efficient, fast, and cost efficient. That'd be really cool to see. And then potentially seeing that across a couple of other chains, L2s, et cetera, that use different consensus mechanisms might potentially speed up the adoption of IBC as well.
Let's maybe talk a little bit about some of the impediments or trade-offs that we're looking at in the future. So one is, for example, I mean, in Cosmos you have 100 chains. IBC has a great security record with 30 billion, I think I read, in assets have been transferred. But for example,
well, that's in the last year. During the Terra times, we were doing around $3 to $5 billion a week. So
since Terra, 30 billion since
no,
Terra.
just in the last calendar year.
Yeah, in the last calendar year.
Yeah.
Well, more or less. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry.
In Axelar, for example, I mean, one of their arguments is that if you have point-to-point connections, those basically expand geometrically the more chains you add. What is the practical significance of that trade-off?
This is sort of true in the naive case, where if I have, so the chain that created the asset always controls it. Let's call this the source chain, right? Because that chain can always inflate the asset in arbitrary manners. It's the fundamental source of truth for sort of the accounting of that specific asset. Now, of course, if you start moving it from like chain A to chain B to chain C, now chain B can also fuck with the numbers of tokens of chain A that exist. However, in order to make this not a problem with IBC, we need to do automatic path shortening, which is that you always route an asset via the chain that created it. So for example, if I want to transfer some ETH from Cosmos to Polkadot, I should transfer it via Ethereum, right? Thereby going via the source chain. Now we don't have this expanding graph of sort of that all these assets are different in the end because they all have slightly different security models depending on their graph, but rather every asset is always one hop away from the source chain. This is also really the only model to get global scale, because when you think of it, like if we have to have one routing point for all assets, this must be a tremendously high throughput blockchain that can route all global cross-chain transfers. The much more sensible way is that every chain handles its own routing for its assets that want to flow throughout the ecosystem. But this is, for example, something that clearly still needs to be worked on within the IBC ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, we do have an existing solution to the path unwinding problem that's working really well in production right now. But I think, you're right. In the pathological case, it is n squared. But in reality, what we're seeing over and over again is people want to build routers. People build routers in the internet. People are going to build routers in IBC. You could visualize what Composable does is as a router chain. And they're offering additional features for developers that make their router chain better and easier to use. I think that as IBC, what we need to do to help address this problem in the intermediate and longer term is help make routers more native for IBC. And native multi-hop that the Polymer team has done, seeing that upstreamed, as well as other features like path unwinding is the way to get there.
Yeah, so like originally this was the intention of the hub, was to become this this router chain, right? And that didn't happen. And so now we're sort of looking at, so with Composable, we're trying to enter the AEZ to sort of bring about this router concept within the kind of like umbrella of the hub, so that this can be, we can actually bring about the first router that's secured by, billions of dollars of economic security. Because again, one of the biggest issues, actually the reason why we started with Polkadot first is because one of the biggest issues or limitations of IBC is you have to trust the chain. So if the chain is vulnerable to 51% attacks, which within the Polkadot ecosystem, you have the relay chain providing billions of economic security for every parachain. And so when we were thinking about which two ecosystems to connect, it made sense for us to start with the highest security environment possible. And so now we're sort of trying to replicate this similar concept within Cosmos as well.
When Composable was bringing IBC to Polkadot, it took quite a long time to make that integration work. If we're going to be trying to expand to other ecosystems in the future, is there something about IBC that still needs to change to make the go-to-market time lower?
Yeah, so this is when you see the ICF roadmaps for the different IBC teams, you see stuff like IBC Go generalization and modifying the relayer to enable other networks. There's a lot of kind of like lower level technical problems where you build the first implementation, it's kind of inherently wedded to the first thing you do with it. And in software development, you have to drive that based on what your users need. So we're only getting our first users in other ecosystems right now, and those help inform future ways where we can modularize the code base. And the first one's really hard, the next 5 are intermediate, and then everything after that is a lot easier. So got the first couple down, we're going into the next 5, and the cost is coming down. And it's just going to continue coming down the more and more we do. But a lot of that is just kind of a natural process of the software maturing.
For example, so Namada doesn't use the CosmoverseHQ, even though it does use Tendermint. And so we had to work with IBCRS, which is, there are just still pain points in this integration, but over time now that we have more and more of these implementations, it just is going to become way easier. So a very practical example for some of these pain points, it's like dependency management. Like if you wanted to change some underlying function, like I've patched 3 downstream repositories in order to make one change in my code base because it's sort of like the types percolate through. Same on the modularity with Hermes, like the informal team is doing a great job there. But for example, with Namada, we still have to run a fork of Hermes that adapts to the Namada RPCs. And so a lot of this work right now is sort of like in its infancy, and like we are the first couple of people, along with people like Penumbra, that are testing this out. But once we've done this, like the next 5 teams doing this, it's not going to be this hard.
It's really funny because of the work that the 3 teams, Composable and Namada and Penumbra, have done on IBCRS. It's actually much more modular than the Go implementation, which is, the second implementation is always better than the first, I guess.
You learn from the first mistakes.
Yeah, I would also classify this as something that I'm really interested in to see like another implementation of CosmWasm deployed across different chains, because that could also accelerate this adoption of IBC. Yeah. Where we've, here at Avalanche, we tend to see mainly EVM chains, right? What we're doing right now to connect IBC to Avalanche is via the EVM, right? To connect it to the EVM chains that we have on Avalanche. But we'd love to see a CosmWasm VM be deployed to make that just more seamless, right? Yeah. And then you could see that happening across multiple different chains, right? Across Polkadot, et cetera.
Yeah, we actually have CosmWasm on our parachain as well. And we've been thinking about trying to find a way to just sort of make it modular enough to be deployed anywhere, but I think it's still early.
One problem that I think Cosmos and Ethereum share is the economic sustainability around relayers. Is that something that you see a clear solution to? I mean, in Ethereum, we most recently saw that with block native, and I think in Cosmos as well, that's a factor to consider, at least in the long term.
Yeah,
So
Adrian, go for it, but I'd like a chance to defend the status quo for a minute, if you don't mind.
I think the status quo is mostly fine because it's fully trustless. As in, like, anyone can run a relay. Like, you can run a relay locally on your phone. It's completely feasible. This is not a permission activity. I think, like, especially on the reeling, there's a very clear path to make this work, which is you add fee payments for IBC messages.
Is that a clear path?
It's maybe, I don't know.
I think the fact that we've had ICS 29 for going on a year now, and there hasn't been significant adoption, shows that there's significant reluctance by applications to add additional layers of fees, and they would much rather pay those fees on behalf of users.
That's true, right? Like, there always then come these trade-offs, and like now users have to understand how these fees work and pay for them. I still hope that at some point we'll see this. I remember at some point Chris was telling me that they'd wish they'd built this at launch rather than having to retrofit it later on, but
yeah, this was a decision that I made as the product manager at that time. It was going to take another 6 to 8 months to get IBC out if we had built in fees into the protocol. And honestly, it would have been a much harder to use protocol. And my theory has always been that there's a ton of network participants that already run servers that have plenty of incentive to run a small additional process. And what we've seen is a market has built up around this. And there's a vibrant community of 50 to 100 different independent relayer operators that all get fees from these various L1 blockchains. The Skip team is working on a protocol to help bring this market on chain, bring it out into the open, and make it more permissionless, which I think is a really interesting way to approach this relayer incentives problem. But even if you look at other protocols like Hyperlane, where we do a lot of work with them, as well as other bridge protocols on not only Ethereum, but Near and many of these other ecosystems, I don't think anyone really has the bridge relayer fees thing solved. Like, it's a hard problem. And I think by punting on it, we've gotten out to market first, and we've claimed the market share in a way that would have been impossible if we had stopped to make it crypto-economically perfect.
I mean, I think one of the things we're actually looking at is when you have Ethereum connectivity, there's obviously now a bunch of different things you can do to actually submit a transaction on chain. You can send it to a private builder, you could send it to an order flow auction, and the person that's actually sending this is the relayer. So theoretically, I believe in like 2 to 3 years, there will be people like market makers like Jump, for instance, who build really, really fast relayers who want to capture bundles of order flow coming from Cosmos chains and vice versa, and then actually profiting off of transferring this order flow to these order flow auctions. That's sort of the way I see relayers in the long term.
Luckily, I hope that in 2 years, we won't have like everyone being front-run by the large builders due to things like Fairview, so that we get actually good front-running protection. On the IBC side with the relayers, I think sort of Linux is an interesting example here, right? Like, for the community, it may be good that there can be a bunch of people running these relayers without a profit motive, because it means that there's no one player to capture it. There can be like thousands of them. That's true. But like, when you look at how Linux is distributed, right? Like, you can host a node that just serves Linux to people. And this is like a pretty decent model. So like, maybe actually not having fees prevented a bunch of centralization from happening because there was no obvious way to sort of capture market share and then make money off this, of like monopolizing it. So
yeah, and
not everything should be paid.
I think one of the ways that we've helped make this easy is the relayer teams have worked really hard on ease of use. And recently we saw TFM, which has been a great leader in helping productionize a lot of the infrastructure level work that the core teams have done, launch a product where with filling in a simple web form and sending them some tokens, they will go and spin up a relayer behind the scenes on your behalf. So it's like relayer as a service. Like, these business models would not have been available if we had built in full-featured fee support, and we would have ended up with the relay centralization that we see in MEV and Ethereum.
Maybe in the last 30 seconds we have, I just want to plant a flag on one topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, Adrian, which is privacy, and how IBC actually connecting all these chains can also help to improve the situation for users who want some.
Yeah, so I take the personal opinion that I think applications should be private. So app chains should be private, and I think so with Namada you can retrofit a lot of privacy on the interchain. Whether we should make IBC itself completely private in the short term, I don't know. This seems really dangerous to me because this is sort of like the trust boundary is always like how do tokens flow between chains. And I think that channel we may want to have full visibility into. This doesn't mean though that users that operate over these channels necessarily should be fully transparent. So you want to have, I think, private chains, but transparent flows between them. And sort of on the privacy note as a whole, I think if this space doesn't become more private, I think it will never gain real-world traction because no large institution in their right mind is like going to put their balance sheet on fully transparent systems. No large government is going to do this. Like we need a level of privacy because without this, no one is ever going to trust these systems. Yeah.
To build on that point, so Avalanche, we have this notion of permission blockchains, right? Obviously, the network is permissionless. You can launch your own permissionless blockchain, but we have this notion of permission subnets where institutions or enterprises have been utilizing them the most, where you can hide your transaction data, kind of keep it to yourself, where no one else can view that public ledger, right? And so in that kind of environment, would you be able to connect an IBC relayer to kind of transfer assets from a public chain to this kind of private network?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Volkswagen can run a single node chain that no one knows the state of, and there can just be a solo machine on IBC.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Yeah, and this is actually why we're seeing a lot of interest in Cosmos from enterprises right now. That ability to build your regulatory perimeter in at the edge of your chain, build in whitelisting and blacklisting features, and give enterprises the types of features that they need is a huge thing driving adoption. We built out a lot of that whitelisting and blacklisting stuff for Circle, and we're looking at more compliance tooling around IBC right now as well.
We're over time, I'm afraid. I'd love to be a fly on the wall of some of these conversations longer, but thanks very much, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.